Hey there, I'm Rachel Ehring, and you're listening to the Top Music Piano Podcast. Get inspired as we discuss creative resources, trends in piano pedagogy, ways to grow your income and streamline your studio, and new ways to engage your students each week. If you are a teacher who wants to go beyond the method books to create an innovative studio that fosters lifelong music makers, you've come to the right place. Hello, piano teachers. Welcome back to the podcast. Today is a really special episode with a guest whose name most of you will recognize. I recently got to sit down with composer Chrissy Ricker and ask her all about how she got into composing, what her day-to-day process looks like, and how we as teachers can help students become more comfortable with improvisation. I love when I get to go behind the scenes with these people whose names are familiar to us, but who we might not know beyond their compositions. Here's a little more about Chrissy before we get into the interview. Chrissy Ricker is a pianist, teacher, and composer from North Carolina. She holds a master's degree in music with a concentration in piano performance and pedagogy. A nationally certified teacher of music, Chrissy enjoys sharing her ideas with other piano teachers. Her articles on piano teaching have been featured in American Music Teacher magazine, and she blogs regularly about piano teaching and composing at her website, chrissyricker.com. A prolific composer and arranger, Chrissy specializes in creating exciting music for piano students of all ages and skill levels. She has published over 40 collections of piano solo and duet music for students that are available from Piano Pronto Publishing and Neil Chose Music Company. Chrissy is also a signature artist arranger with musicnotes.com, where she has a catalog of over 1,000 arrangements, from video game themes to pop songs, for pianists at every level. Here's my interview with Chrissy Ricker. Hi, Chrissy. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here. I would love for you to introduce yourself. I think you really don't need an introduction, but in case people don't know who you are, just give us a brief overview of you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me today. So I'm Chrissy Ricker. I am a pianist, teacher, and composer from North Carolina. I live right in the middle of North Carolina, about an hour south from the state capital, if anyone's familiar with that area. And I started playing piano when I was 7 years old. I think I knew pretty much immediately that it was what I wanted to do forever, because playing piano, making music, creating my own music was always something that was just very important to me. And so I went to college here in North Carolina to get my bachelor's and master's degrees in piano performance and pedagogy. And then I started teaching, and I taught piano for over 25 years. And along the way, I started writing music for my students to play. I would write little pieces to help them with a concept that they were struggling with. I would write something in a style that I knew they really enjoyed. And my students seemed to really like the music that I wrote. Maybe they were just being nice, but they seemed to enjoy it. And so about 15 years ago, I started actively pursuing getting my music published. And I've had the opportunity to work with a few different publishing companies now. Right now, I'm publishing with Piano Pronto out of California, and also with Music Notes, where I get to arrange all kinds of fun things like video game themes and pop songs. So that has been a really fun journey for me over the last 15 years. And the other thing I currently really enjoy doing is sharing my ideas with other teachers. I started a piano teaching blog about 9 years ago now, and I just like to share ideas of things that I've used in my own studio that I have found helpful. I know one of the things I love about connecting with other teachers is just that exchange of ideas, because there's always so many new things to learn. There's always a new way of doing things that I hadn't thought of before. And so I hope that I can share some of the things that I have found helpful with other teachers through my blog.
Yeah, and your music is so well loved by teachers. I see and hear your name everywhere because you're so prolific, first of all, with all the music that you've written. And then I think it just really connects with teachers and with students, most importantly. And if it's connecting with the students, the teachers are going to keep using it, of course.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So like I said, you have so many resources for teachers and pianists. Can you maybe give us kind of an overview of what you've published and what's available?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So I do have a pretty large catalog now, just because I've been doing this for 15 years. So it's something I've gradually built over time. One thing that I think is helpful for teachers who maybe want to explore what I have to offer is I like to write collections of pieces. I think those really give teachers the bang for the buck when you can buy a whole book of pieces. And I also like to write in series. So I will write a series of books where the focus is all on the same genre or the same teaching concept. And then I have multiple levels in that series. So for example, I have a series called Perfect Patterns, where every piece in that series is pattern based. And so that can be a great resource if you've got a student that's struggling with note reading or a student that really needs help with pattern recognition. That can give you a lot of pieces to work with. So I've got lots of different series of books based around a similar concept. I've got a series of rock and pop inspired pieces. I've got a series of video game inspired pieces, a series of expressive lyrical pieces. And so for any teachers who are interested in kind of seeing an overview of what I've done, on my website, I have a publications tab where you can see all of my piano music listed by series. And that'll give you a kind of a good overview of what each series is about. And then each book in the series is listed by order of difficulty.
Got it. Okay. So that's a good place to start, right?
Good place to start for my original music. Yeah. And then for my arrangements, which is a kind of a separate catalog, I've got over 1,000 arrangements at this point with music notes. My personal favorite thing to arrange is video game music and film music because I love pieces that tell a story. And I think those kinds of pieces are really great storytelling pieces. But I also have on my website a place where you can search my catalog. And so if a teacher's interested in exploring my arrangements, I would suggest they go there. And then you can type in, let's say you're looking for music from Wicked. You know, that's been super popular recently with the new movie coming out. So you can type in Wicked, you can see all of my arrangements, and then you can filter by level. So if you only want to see the elementary arrangements, you can click on that. So those are kind of the two resources I would suggest for teachers just to get an overview of what I've done.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you for giving us that. So you mentioned that you started piano at 7 and that you knew right away that it was going to be your thing. How do you feel like those early lessons impacted what you're doing today and, becoming a composer and having the skills to do that? And maybe along with that, how can teachers equip their young students to have that trajectory?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So the lessons I took growing up were very much your traditional classical piano lessons. And so I really didn't get any formal composition training until I went to college, which I think is a bit unusual because I've met so many other composers that started very young with formal training. For me, it was really more about exploring on my own, playing by ear, using the music theory concepts that my teacher was teaching me and using those as building blocks to create my own music. Probably one of the skills I think I learned early on, and this is a little bit embarrassing to admit, I was actually growing up not a very good sight reader. It's still not my favorite thing. I'm better at it now than I was, but growing up, I really struggled with note reading and sight reading. And so I would a lot of times just take the music and create my own version of whatever I was working on. Or instead of using the sheet music, I would listen to it and then create my own arrangement. Those are probably not the ideal traits for a piano student to have, but they were great for me as a future composer and arranger because I really learned how to take a piece of music and simplify it down to its main components and use those to create something that sounded sophisticated without being overly difficult to play and overly difficult to read. So that's a skill I developed. And so I think the lesson that teachers can learn from that is if your student is struggling with note reading, don't give up on them. Look at things like composing and improvising and being creative as ways to make those musical connections with your students, because you never know. They might not ever be like your best sight reader, but maybe they'll grow up to be a composer one day. There's still a lot of value in that.
It's so interesting because I also started piano when I was about 7 and I had the traditional lessons just like you, but I actually liked reading the notes and liked sight reading. And so rather than, practice what I was supposed to be practicing, I would just sit down and sight read through like books, old books, new books, anything I could get my hands on. And I mean, I'm terrible at the improvisation stuff. Like that is not what it's hard for me. But I ended up having a career as a collaborative pianist where I was sight reading all the time. So it's so interesting that, different kids are going to gravitate different ways. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. We just kind of have to fill in the gaps as best we can, right?
Right, because there are so many different pathways to being a successful musician and having a successful career in music. And I think that the more you can explore lots of different skills and the more you can encourage students, even if they maybe aren't successful in the skills that you personally were successful at when you were learning piano, that's still okay. Because everybody is good at their own thing. So I think that's a great thing to keep in mind.
Yes. And I'm working hard to try and learn more of those like early improvisation skills to do with my students, like activities that I can do with them. And of course, having people like you on the podcast helps because it gives me more ideas to use with my students. So I'm curious, this is kind of a two-part question. I'm wondering how much time you actually spend composing in a day or in a week. And then how do you keep coming up with new ideas and keeping things fresh?
Yes. So I really do try to either work on a composition or an arrangement every single day. I think it's the kind of skill where the more you do it, the easier you get. The more that you just sit down and get started in the process, the more ideas you will get. I think a lot of people have this idea that a composer just goes for a walk in the forest and the inspiration strikes and they run home. And not to say that can't happen, but for me, I think the creativity happens when I'm actually sitting there and working through the ideas and kind of starting the creative process rather than it being like a burst of inspiration every single time.
So do you usually come up with the like title or topic first or the musical idea and then put a name to it?
Yeah, I've done it both ways. For me personally, if I can come up with a really good title first, I find that it really can inspire the music much more easily. So if at all possible, I like to brainstorm and keep a doc in my computer of all of my title ideas, because I find for me that kind of helps to generate the music. Sometimes it's really difficult when I've written a piece that I really like and I don't know what to call it, but I've done it both ways.
Are you still teaching or are you primarily composing now?
Right now, I am composing and arranging full time.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, I made the transition a couple of years ago. I had taught piano for over 25 years, and I just reached a point where I was coming up on the end of the school year. And I had quite a few students graduating and moving on to college. I had some students who were moving out of state. I had some students that had already told me, we're doing sports next year. We just don't think we'll be able to continue with piano. And it reached a point where next year I was only going to have a handful of students. And so I thought, if there was ever a time that I'm going to make the leap to really focus on composing and arranging, now is probably a good time. And I was able to match all of my students up with my friends who are teachers for the most part. And I'm still able to keep in touch with them, to go to their recitals and kind of hear how they're doing. So it was a really difficult decision. I'm not going to lie. I shed some tears. I had some sleepless nights, but I think it was a decision that worked out really well. And it feels like a blessing to me to now be able to really focus on being creative all the time.
Yeah, you're not kind of splitting your attention, right, between teaching and composing. And how has it been for you? Do you miss having those test subjects to play your music, or do you still have it sounds like you have some teacher connections where maybe their students are playing your pieces?
Exactly. So I do miss having my own students because my students were always very honest. And if I gave them something and they didn't like it, they would say, no, thank you. So, but I do have teacher friends who have been very, very supportive and teach my music and give me feedback. So that's been really nice.
That's good. I love it. I would love to hear about the cover art on your pieces. I was scrolling through your website and the covers were so strikingly beautiful. I think that that's probably kind of what draws teachers and students in. And then, of course, the music backs that up. But tell me about how you get these beautiful covers for your music.
Yeah, thank you. I can't take any credit for the cover art because I work with a really wonderful team at Piano Pronto. Jennifer and Justin over at Piano Pronto do all the graphic design and cover art for the books. They are wonderful at looking at a piece of music and being able to choose an image that really captures the mood of that piece of music. So I'm really grateful that I have them to take care of that part for me because I do not have an artistic bone in my body. I don't think my covers would be nearly as impressive if it were up to me, but
Nice. Yeah. And I did an interview with Jennifer Eklund from Piano Pronto a few months ago. So if listeners want to go back and hear more about Piano Pronto, they can check that one out. Before we talk about improvisation, if a listener is new to your music, what are some of the fan favorites that they might want to check out?
Yes. So there's a couple of series of books that I have over at Piano Pronto that have been really popular. One series I would suggest is my Let's Quest series. Those are pieces that are all inspired by video game music. And I think we all have had students who love video games and just want to play pieces from their favorite video games. So I started writing the Let's Quest series back in 2016. And it was really inspired by my own students who wanted to play those video game pieces, but weren't ready for the arrangements that were already on the market of that music. And so I would write pieces in a similar style. And the thing I love about video game music is that it's storytelling music. It's there's so many different genres and different sounds in video game music today. And so it's a really good way to get students comfortable with this idea of telling a story through music. They can put themselves in the character's shoes and kind of imagine what's happening when they play the piece of music. And so that series, Let's Quest, there are 5 books in that series. From the elementary through the late intermediate level. So that's one I would definitely recommend that has been popular. And then the other series that I would suggest, just because I think it's my favorite, is my Rhapsodies and Reveries series. Those are all pieces that are expressive, lyrical pieces. I often will have students who'll come in and say, well, I just heard this Chopin nocturne I want to play. Or I just heard Clair de Lune. I want to play Clair de Lune. And, very often they weren't quite ready for those pieces. And it can be tough to find pieces for less advanced students that still develop those artistic skills. And so I wrote the Rhapsodies and Reveries series as a way to kind of give students stepping stones to being able to play those beautiful expressive pieces. So you'll find concepts like phrasing, and making big dynamic changes and using the damper pedal and, tempo changes like rubato. So those are all concepts that students can learn playing these pieces that will prepare them for, the classics that we all love.
Yeah, I love that you're writing stepping stones for them. And I know when I was a kid that I would have loved the Rhapsodies and Reveries. That was like my style, that I wanted to sit down and just play beautiful lyrical music. I remember I had a book of Dennis Alexander's music that I loved playing. I would love to pick your brain a little bit about teaching improvisation to students. Can you give us maybe some simple, creative ways that teachers can include improvisation in piano lessons?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So, teaching improvisation was always really important to me because it was something that I loved doing growing up. And I think I very naively assumed when I was a young teacher that all of my students would love it as much as I did. And I soon discovered that improv can be very scary for a lot of students because they don't have the security of having notes in front of them. And so what I like to tell teachers is that you don't have to do anything elaborate at first when you're improvising with your students. You don't have to do anything super time intensive. So I would encourage teachers to look for ways that you can incorporate these creative bursts into your lessons. So for example, if a student is learning a piece, take a minute in the lesson and say, okay, we're going to take the first line of this piece and we're going to play around with it. Can you play this first line an octave lower on the piano? Can you make all the notes staccato? Can you make this as soft as possible? And how does that change the mood of the piece? How does that make you feel when you do that? So these are very simple ways that you can take something the student's already familiar with and have them explore different sounds. So that's a really nice way to ease students into this idea of being creative. And then once students are comfortable with the idea, I like to use activities like one of my favorites with especially younger students is storytelling with improv. And where I'll tell a story, I'll narrate, and I'll tell them, okay, you're going to be my sound effect engineer. And when I get to a particular part in the story, I want you to create a sound that you think fits the story. That's a great way to teach the concept of communication through music. And students don't have to be able to create a melody or a harmony at that point. They don't even have to play a sound on the piano. They could, use body percussion. It can be really whatever they want. It's just getting them comfortable with that idea of creating sound and how sound can tell a story. And then from there, I like to move on to doing improv using the black keys. I think the black keys are a really good tool for improv because it's a very visual parameter that you can give to students. And so I'll say, I'm going to play this nice little duet part over here. I want you to play these 2 black keys, and I want you to just play quarter notes. And so their options at that point are, well, I can play this key on the left, I can play this key on the right, or I can play them at the same time. They basically got 3 options at that point. So they have some nice, safe parameters there. And then the other thing that I think is helpful for teachers to remember when you're introducing improv is you don't just want to do these activities at one lesson. You want to do them at every lesson. And so a lot of times I will repeat the exact same activity at every lesson for a month or for 2 months. I think sometimes as teachers, we get so focused on introducing something new and moving forward that we forget there's a lot of safety for students in just the repetition of doing something they're already comfortable with. And so I want to do that activity with students so many times that they know exactly what's going to happen. And in fact, I kind of want them to get a little bit bored because I want them to then say, well, I'm tired of playing these 2 notes. Can't I play something different? And at that point, I can say, well, sure, of course you can play something different. And so now we're letting them loosen those parameters a little bit as they've become comfortable and add additional elements to that activity.
That's such good advice. And I don't know if I've ever heard anyone say it that way, because our creative teacher brains always want to do like, oh, we have to do something different. We have to think of a new way to teach improv. But I think you're right. Like getting them to that point of, okay, I'm really comfortable with this activity and what else can I do with it? Like that's kind of the goal, right?
Right. Yeah. And I think a lot of times for some students, it takes several attempts, several lessons before they actually understand what they're supposed to do. And they feel safe enough to kind of, try something different. So, I think that's a great thing to keep in mind is we as teachers think, oh, they're getting bored with this, but a lot of times they're not. A lot of students just love repeating things over and over. So don't be afraid to do that.
Yeah, I'm going to try that with my students. And I teach primarily beginners. So I could probably just pick one activity and do it with all my students every week for several weeks in a row. And then it would keep me from forgetting what I'm supposed to be doing with who.
Yeah. And I think that's great for teachers too, because a lot of times, if we've got so many different things we're trying to fit into the lesson and trying to keep up with who we've taught what, just keeping it simple, using that same thing for multiple lessons, it can make our job easier too.
Yeah, I like that. I'm going to run with that. So we mostly talk about kids, teaching kids on this podcast, but I would love to hear your thoughts about improvisation for adults. I have a adult student who's a beginner and she's terrified of improvisation. Like she wants to play what's on the page in the book. She wants to turn the page and play the next song. And last week we had a few minutes left at the end and I was like, oh, we still have a few minutes. Do you want to do some improvisation? She's like, no, I'll just go early. Like,
oh no.
So what advice do you have for fearful adult students?
Yes. I think it can be really tough with adults because, in addition to learning a new skill, there is this self-consciousness that comes from having someone watching you. So with adults, I honestly do the same types of activities that I do with my younger students. Now, if I'm doing a storytelling improv, I might tell a story that's a little more, mature. So for example, instead of telling a story about a bear who lives in the forest, I might say, okay, you imagine you're on vacation in Hawaii and you go hiking and there's this beautiful waterfall and you hear the water trickling. And then, and I would kind of use something like that for an adult student, but it would be the exact same process of creating sound and then moving to the black keys and gradually expanding those parameters. And one of the things I have found really helpful for adults is a lot of times in the lesson, they will try what we're talking about, but they don't really get comfortable with it while we're sitting there watching them. I think there's this kind of sense that, oh, I'm being judged, even if that's not what we're doing as teachers. And so if it's an activity that I can go through on a very basic level, but then I know that they can dive deeper into at home, I think that can be really helpful. And so one thing I would suggest trying with adults is having them do some improv over backing tracks. There are a lot of really great backing tracks available for free on YouTube that I have found really helpful. There's backing tracks. One that I really like that I have found is 12-bar blues in the key of E flat, because when you play the black keys over that 12-bar blues in the key of E flat, you're basically playing the E flat minor pentatonic scale, which works great for the blues. So you can give the link to your student and say, okay, I want you to go home, listen to this backing track, and just play those two black keys and just start with quarter notes. And I think for adults, just being able to do it at home where they're not being watched can be really helpful. And a lot of times I've had a student that when I'm doing improv in their lesson with them, I'm thinking, I don't know if this is really clicking with them. I don't know if they're getting this, or I don't know. I can't tell if they like this. And then a few weeks down the road, they'll come in and they'll say, I want to play something for you. And they'll just start playing. And I'll think, oh, okay, now they've got that comfort level and they're really starting to apply what we've done in the lesson.
Yeah, that's really good. I'll try that with her because every week she's like, I could play this at home, but I can't play it in front of you. So I think there is that intimidation of being in the lesson. And sometimes I think playing with them as well, like if I'm playing an accompaniment part and letting her kind of deedly around on the piano, maybe that helps a little bit too.
And then they can play something that's super simple and it doesn't sound babyish. It still sounds sophisticated because you're playing along with them. And I think that's helpful for adults too. They don't want to, if you're learning something new, you don't want it to sound babyish, right? You still want it to sound like you know what you're doing, even when you really don't know what you're doing. So,
yeah, I'll look for some of those backing tracks too, though. That's a really good idea. So I would love to know if you have anything new coming out that listeners should be on the lookout for, or maybe something that you've released recently that they haven't maybe seen yet.
Yes. So I actually just released 2 books that I'm really excited about. And these are both books for elementary pianists. I think most composers I know, when we talk about composing, we all agree that the elementary level is the most difficult level to write for. Because
I believe it.
Yeah, you're really limited to such a narrow palette of notes and rhythms, but you still want the music to sound sophisticated and interesting. So I'm really proud of these 2 books because they're elementary books that I think are really fun and approachable for any age student. One book is a book of duets. It's called Better Together, published by Piano Pronto. And these are 10 elementary duets. Both parts are at an equal level. And both parts get to play the melody. So both parts have something interesting going on. And I think duets are a wonderful way to help your students develop their sense of rhythm, to help with their listening skills. They're a great way to build community in your studio because you can pair up students and they have a built-in practice buddy when they're learning their duets. So that's a collection I'm really excited about. And then the other collection that just came out is my first Rhapsodies and Reveries book. So it's the last book I wrote, but it's called First Rhapsodies and Reveries. It's because it's the easiest. It's for elementary students. And so this is a book that introduces concepts like dynamic contrasts, very simple use of the damper pedal. So maybe a student's asked to hold the damper pedal for an entire piece or just for one line of music. Very simple phrasing. So those elements that we want our elementary students to learn to play beautiful and expressive music are in this book. So that's my two newest babies that I'm very excited about.
Great. I'm going to check out the duet book. We have a couple of students in the conservatory here that I think would enjoy those. So,
oh, great. Thank you.
Yeah. Are there any other resources that you want to highlight before we close?
Sure. Yeah. So I mentioned my blog that I have on my website, and I hope teachers will check that out and maybe get some ideas that they can apply to their teaching. And the other resource I have that I hope teachers will take a look at, I have a page that is called Free Stuff. And I've gradually been adding to this page over the last 9 years. So a lot of the improv activities, the composition worksheets, the music history resources, a lot of things I've created for my students, I've posted on this page. It's absolutely free. You don't have to sign up for anything. You just click on whatever you think looks interesting and you use it with your students. So I hope that that's a resource that teachers will find helpful as well.
Yeah. You know, piano teachers love free stuff. We love our freebies.
Well, well, when I was a young teacher, especially, I benefited so much from the generosity of other teachers. And so this was something that I wanted to do just to kind of pay that forward. I think piano teachers are so generous and sharing of ideas. And so I hope this is something that other teachers can find helpful.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Where can listeners find all of these things? Can you give us your website again and other places where they should go to find all of your music and resources?
Yes. So my website is chrissyricker.com.
Do you want to spell it just to be sure?
Yes. So ChrissyrIcker, chrissyricker.com. Yes. And so from there, you can click on publications to see all of my piano collections, like I mentioned earlier. You can click on search my catalog to search my music by level or by style. You can see my blog, and then you can also see all of my free resources. So that's kind of a good place to see everything. And then my piano music is published with Piano Pronto at pianopronto.com, and also with Music Notes, musicnotes.com. So you can also find my resources on those two websites.
Well, Chrissy, it was so fun to meet you and talk to you today. Thank you for giving your time and sharing all of these great ideas and resources for teachers. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much. It was so fun to talk with you, and I hope that I have some helpful ideas that people are excited to try out.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chrissy, for being so generous with your time and sharing your expertise with us. I really enjoyed doing this interview, and I know that I got some ideas to use with my own students, and I hope you did as well. That's the end of the show for this week. Next week on the podcast, I'm going to be sharing ways to teach musicality to our students. We often talk about technique, improvisation, scales, games, all the things, but we often forget the most valuable skill of teaching our students to play musically. So be sure to tune in next week to hear my thoughts on this really important topic. I'm Rachel Ehring, and you've been listening to the Top Music Piano Podcast. I'll talk to you again soon.
How do you keep up to date with all the latest trends and research into music education? How do you connect with other teachers around the world and make sure your teaching stays fresh and relevant for students of all ages and stages, both now and into the future? I created our Top Music Pro membership to be the one-stop shop for music teaching resources, training, support, and community, and I'd love for you to come and join us inside. With over 40 comprehensive training courses, hundreds of teaching demonstrations and lesson plans, free monthly sheet music, discounts, and all the business and pedagogy support you could ever need, Top Music Pro is the community you've been looking for. If you're ready to level up your learning from the podcast and join thousands of other teachers in our global network, head over to topmusicpro.com today.